Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that controls our lives so completely. We rarely stop to think about how absolutely insane it is. Money. Those pieces of paper, metal discs, or digital numbers that determine whether we eat, where we live, and how we're valued by society, is perhaps humanity's strangest invention. It only works because we all agree to pretend it works. And throughout history, that collective pretense has taken form so bizarre that they make cryptocurrency look positively sensible. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. What's the strangest thing you've ever used as money? After tonight, you'll realize that question has some truly wild historical answers. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because we're about to explore a world where Roman soldiers were literally worth their salt, where warrior monks invented international banking while supposedly living in poverty, and where emperors discovered they could create wealth from nothing by filing down coins, until economic reality caught up with them in spectacular fashion. Part 1. Salt, the white gold that built empires. When we think of valuable commodities from the ancient world, we imagine gold, silver, precious gems. But for thousands of years, there was another substance so valuable it was used as money, so important that wars were fought over it, so essential that civilizations rose and fell based on their access to it. That substance was salt, common table salt that you probably have sitting in your kitchen right now, worth pennies. But in the ancient world, salt was literally worth its weight in precious metals. To understand why salt became currency, you need to understand what the ancient world was like without refrigeration. Salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was the primary technology for preserving food. Without salt, meat rotted in days, fish spoiled in hours, vegetables couldn't be stored for winter. Salt meant the difference between survival and starvation, between successful military campaigns and armies dying of hunger, between thriving trade routes and economic isolation. It was divisible. You could break it into smaller portions without losing value. It was portable, easier to carry than livestock or grain. It was recognizable. Everyone knew what salt looked like and could verify its quality. It was durable. If kept dry, salt lasted indefinitely. And most importantly, it had intrinsic value, unlike gold, which was mostly decorative. Salt had practical use that guaranteed demand. In ancient Rome, the importance of salt was embedded in the language itself. The word salary comes from salarium, originally the money given to Roman soldiers to buy salt, later becoming their regular pay. When we say someone is worth their salt, we're using a phrase that was once literal. A person's value measured in their salt allocation. The Roman phrase cum grano salis, with a grain of salt, originally meant adding value or wisdom to something, though it's evolved to mean skepticism. The Roman state took salt production seriously, deadly seriously. Major salt works were state monopolies, controlled as tightly as modern governments control currency printing. The Via Salaria, one of Rome's earliest and most important roads, was built specifically to transport salt from the coastal salt pans to Roman inland territories. Control of salt routes meant control of economies, and disrupting salt supplies was considered an act of war. Roman soldiers weren't just paid in salt directly. That's actually a historical misconception. They received money to buy salt, but the connection between salt and payment was so strong that the terms became interchangeable. A soldier's salarium had to be enough to buy salt for preserving their rations, salt for their horses, who needed it for health, and salt for trade in frontier regions where it was scarce. The quality and quantity of salt in a soldier's pay could determine military effectiveness. Legions with adequate salt could preserve food for long campaigns, maintain their horses' health, and trade with local populations for intelligence and supplies. Legions without sufficient salt saw their food supplies rot, their animals sicken, and their ability to operate independently diminished. Salt was a strategic resource as important as weapons or armor. The salt standard and economic control. The Roman government's control of salt went beyond military pay. It was a tool of economic and social control that would make modern central banks jealous. By controlling salt production, the price of salt was regulated by the state but not uniformly. Different regions paid different prices based on their relationship with Rome. Loyal provinces enjoyed subsidized salt prices, making food preservation affordable and encouraging population growth. Rebellious territories faced salt embargoes or inflated prices, literally starving them into submission. This economic weapon was often more effective than military force. During the Punic Wars, Rome used salt as a weapon of total destruction. After defeating Carthage, legend says the Romans salted the earth to prevent anything from growing again. While historians debate whether this literally happened, the story reveals how Romans understood salt's power. It could preserve life or destroy it, create wealth or annihilate it. The salt trade created some of history's first multinational corporations. Merchant families specialized in salt transport, developing sophisticated logistics networks that spanned the Mediterranean. They created financial instruments to manage risk, an ancient form of insurance against shipwrecks or banditry. They established credit systems so buyers could purchase salt on account, paying after the preserved foods were sold. Salt taxation was so lucrative that it funded major public works. The construction of aqueducts, roads, and public buildings was often financed through salt revenues. When Julius Caesar needed funds for his campaigns, he seized control of salt production facilities. When Augustus needed to stabilize the economy after civil wars, he reformed salt distribution. Every major Roman ruler understood that controlling salt meant controlling society. The Roman salt economy created entire cities. Ostia, Rome's port city, grew wealthy from salt production in nearby coastal pans. Venice, before it became a maritime empire, started as a collection of salt-producing islands. Cities along salt routes became commercial hubs, growing rich from taxing and servicing salt caravans. The geography of salt shaped the geography of civilization, but salt as currency had problems. Quality varied enormously. Sea salt, rock salt, and salt from different regions had different purities and properties. Fraud was common. Salt could be adulterated with sand, chalk, or other white substances. Storage was crucial. Salt that got wet lost value or became unusable. These problems required elaborate systems of quality control, standardization, and verification that preceded similar systems for metal currency. Rome wasn't unique in using salt as currency. Civilizations worldwide independently discovered salt's monetary properties. In ancient China, salt coins were created by pressing salt into molds and stamping them with official seals. These could be used for transactions or dissolved back into usable salt when needed. The Chinese government's salt monopoly was so profitable, it funded the Great Wall's construction. In medieval Africa, salt was literally worth more than gold in some regions. Caravans crossing the Sahara carried salt slabs from coastal regions to salt-starved interior kingdoms. A pound of salt could trade for an ounce of gold in Timbuktu. The saying to be worth one's weight in salt had literal meaning in West African kingdoms, where salt was weighed against gold dust on merchant scales. The Venetian Republic built its wealth on salt. By controlling salt production in the Adriatic and forcing other cities to buy Venetian salt at inflated prices, Venice funded its transformation from a collection of muddy islands into a marble-clad empire. The Venetian salt monopoly was so complete that producing salt without permission was punishable by death. In Ethiopia, salt bars called a mool served as currency into the 20th century. These were standardized blocks of salt, each weighing about a pound, marked with specific patterns to prevent counterfeiting. Prices were quoted in amole. A chicken might cost 3 amole, a goat 20. Unlike metal coins which could be hoarded, salt currency encouraged spending since it could deteriorate if stored improperly. The Maya and Aztec civilizations used salt as both currency and sacred substance. Salt production sites were considered holy, and salt workers held special religious status. Cakes of salt wrapped in palm leaves served as small change in markets. During religious ceremonies, salt was burned as an offering to gods, literally destroying wealth to gain divine favor. In medieval Japan, salt was so valuable that samurai were sometimes paid in rice and salt rather than coins. The expression shio wa okuru, to send salt, meant to help an enemy in dire need, originating from when one warlord sent salt to a rival whose territories were blockaded from salt supplies. This act of providing salt to an enemy became a legendary example of honorable conduct. The reason salt worked as currency across so many cultures wasn't just economic, it was biological. Humans need salt to survive, requiring about 6 grams daily to maintain proper nerve and muscle function. Without adequate salt, people develop hypernatremia, fatigue, confusion, seizures, and eventually death. This biological necessity created constant, inelastic demand that backed salt's value more reliably than gold's decorative appeal. Animals also need salt, making it essential for any society with livestock. Horses, cattle, sheep, and goats all require salt supplements, especially when working hard or producing milk. A Roman cavalry horse needed about an ounce of salt daily. Multiply that by thousands of horses, and you understand why controlling salt meant controlling military power. Salt's preservative properties work through osmosis. Salt draws water from bacterial cells, killing them before they can cause decay. This wasn't understood scientifically until the 19th century, but the practical effects were known for millennia. Meat packed in salt could last months, fish could be transported thousands of miles, vegetables could survive winter storage. Salt didn't just preserve food, it preserved wealth by preventing valuable protein from rotting. The human taste for salt is evolutionarily programmed. Our ancestors, who craved salt, were more likely to maintain proper electrolyte balance and survive. This created a psychological component to salt's value. It wasn't just necessary, it was desirable. Salt made bland food palatable, turned survival eating into enjoyable meals. The ability to provide salted food was a mark of wealth and hospitality. Different salts had different properties that affected their currency value. Sea salt contained trace minerals that affected flavor and preservation properties. Rock salt was purer, but harder to extract. Salt from certain regions was prized for specific uses. Some salts were better for preserving meat, others for cheese making, others for leather tanning. This created a complex exchange system where different salts had different values for different purposes. In the 12th century, a group of warrior monks accidentally invented international banking while trying to protect pilgrims. The Knights Templar, founded as a military religious order, became so successful at moving money without moving money that they essentially created the financial system that still underlies modern banking. The Templars' origin story reads like medieval fiction. In 1119, 9 French knights, led by Hugues de Payens, took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, dedicating themselves to protecting Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. They were given quarters in the Temple Mount, hence Templars, and initially survived on donations, supposedly so poor that 2 knights had to share a horse, an image that became their seal. But this poverty was deceptive. Within 50 years, the Templars had become one of the wealthiest organizations in the medieval world, with a financial network that stretched from Scotland to the Holy Land. They owned vast estates, commanded fleets of ships, and controlled castles across Europe and the Middle East. More importantly, they had solved a problem that had plagued commerce for centuries: how to move large amounts of money safely across dangerous territories. The problem facing medieval travelers was acute. Pilgrims to the Holy Land needed money for a journey that could take years, but carrying coins meant attracting robbers. Merchants faced the same problem: how to pay for goods in distant markets without physically transporting chests of gold through bandit-infested territories. The Templars' solution was revolutionary. They invented the medieval equivalent of travelers' checks. Here's how it worked. A pilgrim in Paris would deposit money at the local Templar commandery. The Templars would give them a coded document, a letter of credit, detailing the deposit. When the pilgrim reached Jerusalem, they would present this document at the Templar headquarters and withdraw their money, minus a small fee. The physical coins never moved, but the value traveled thousands of miles safely. This seemed simple now, but it required innovations that wouldn't be reinvented for centuries. The Templars developed sophisticated encryption systems to prevent forgery. They created standardized accounting methods to track deposits and withdrawals across their network. They established exchange rates between different currencies. They even developed an early form of international law to handle disputes across jurisdictions. The Templars' banking system required infrastructure that dwarfed most kingdoms. They established commanderies, fortified administrative centers, in every major city from London to Jerusalem. Each commandery was simultaneously a bank, a fortress, a monastery, and a warehouse. They were connected by the fastest communication network of the age, Templar messengers who could travel under the Order's protection. The physical design of Templar commanderies reflected their dual role as monasteries and banks. The ground floor typically held the vault, massive stone chambers with complex locking mechanisms that would challenge modern safecrackers. The counting houses where financial records were kept were as heavily guarded as the treasuries. The dormitories where Knight brothers slept were Spartan, but the halls where financial business was conducted were impressive enough to inspire confidence in depositors. Security was paramount and sophisticated. Templar vaults used multiple locks requiring different keys, held by different officers, an early form of dual control that modern banks still use. Documents were authenticated with complex seals that were nearly impossible to forge. The Templars developed secret codes and ciphers, some so complex they weren't decoded until the 20th century. The Templars' accounting system was revolutionary for its time. They used double-entry bookkeeping centuries before it supposedly was invented in Italy. Every transaction was recorded in multiple ledgers, local records, regional summaries, and central accounts in Paris and Jerusalem. They conducted regular audits, with inspectors traveling between commanderies to verify accounts. They even developed early forms of financial statements showing assets, liabilities, and cash flows. But the Templars went beyond simple deposit and withdrawal. They offered loans to kings and nobles, charging interest through various loopholes that circumvented religious prohibitions on usury. They managed estates for nobles away on crusade, collecting rents and paying expenses. They provided pension plans for knights, who paid into the system during their active years. They even offered maritime insurance for merchant ships. At their peak, they managed the finances of most European nobility. The French crown jewels were stored in the Paris Temple. English kings used the London Temple as their treasury. When King John of England needed to pay his ransom to the Holy Roman Emperor, the Templars arranged the transfer. When Louis VII of France needed financing for the Second Crusade, the Templars provided it. The economics of faith and steel. The Templars' unique position as warrior monks gave them advantages no other bankers could match. Their military might meant they could protect their own shipments and enforce their own contracts. A merchant who defaulted on a Templar loan might find armed knights at his door. A noble who tried to seize Templar assets faced excommunication and military retaliation. Their religious status provided crucial benefits. As a religious order, they were exempt from local taxes and laws, answering only to the Pope. They could move freely across borders that stopped others. Their churches provided sanctuary that even kings couldn't violate. Their vow of poverty, paradoxically, made them trustworthy with others' wealth. Individual Templars couldn't enrich themselves, so the order's wealth was secure from internal theft. The Templars developed sophisticated financial instruments that wouldn't be seen again for centuries. They created letters of credit that could be partially drawn, allowing travelers to access funds as needed. They offered currency exchange services with rates that varied based on political stability and trade flows. They even developed an early form of deposit insurance, guaranteeing funds against loss from theft or disaster. Their lending practices were equally innovative. While Christian doctrine forbade charging interest, the Templars found creative solutions. They might lend 100 marks but require repayment of 110 marks in a different currency, with the exchange rate hiding the interest. They accepted land as collateral, gaining control of vast estates when borrowers defaulted. They offered gifts to the order that came with guaranteed annual payments, essentially selling annuities. The Templars also pioneered international trade finance. A merchant could deposit goods at one Templar facility and receive credit to purchase goods elsewhere. The Templars would handle the physical transport and storage, assuming the risks but taking a percentage. This allowed merchants to operate across vast distances without physically accompanying their goods. The Templars diversified their holdings across regions and asset types: land, gold, trade goods, loans. They maintained reserves to handle unusual withdrawals. They gathered intelligence on political and economic conditions that might affect their operations. Their network of commanderies shared information about creditworthy merchants, unreliable borrowers, and changing market conditions. The intelligence network. The Templars' banking empire required something even more valuable than gold: information. They created one of history's first international intelligence networks, gathering economic, political, and military information that informed their financial decisions. This intelligence capability made them invaluable to kings and dangerous to enemies. Every Templar commandery was an information hub. Traveling knights, pilgrims, and merchants brought news from across the known world. The Templars systematically collected, analyzed, and distributed this information through their network. They knew about crop failures before food prices rose, about wars before armies marched, about political changes before they were announced. This intelligence was monetized in various ways. The Templars could adjust interest rates based on political risk. They could buy or sell commodities based on anticipated shortages or surpluses. They could advise allied nobles on economic decisions. They essentially operated an early form of economic consulting alongside their banking services. The Templars developed codes and ciphers to protect their communications. Some of these were simple substitution ciphers, but others were remarkably complex. They used invisible inks made from various substances. They embedded messages in seemingly innocent religious texts. They even developed early forms of steganography, hiding messages within images or decorative patterns. Their courier system was the fastest in medieval Europe. Templar messengers could travel on the order's horses, stay at the order's commanderies, and pass through territories under the order's protection. A message could travel from London to Jerusalem faster through Templar channels than through royal diplomatic pouches. This speed of communication gave them enormous advantages in financial markets. The Templar success ultimately led to their destruction. By the early 14th century, they had become too wealthy, too powerful, and too independent for kings to tolerate. Deeply in debt to the Templars, and eager to seize their wealth, orchestrated their downfall in one of history's most dramatic financial coups. On Friday, October 13, 1307, the origin of Friday the 13th being unlucky, Philip ordered the simultaneous arrest of all Templars in France. The charges were sensational: heresy, idol worship, sodomy, and corruption. Under torture, some Templars confessed to bizarre crimes like spitting on the cross and worshipping a mysterious head called Baphomet. Modern historians recognize these as standard Inquisition charges designed to justify seizure of assets. The financial implications were immediate and far-reaching. The Templar banking network, built over 2 centuries, collapsed overnight. Deposits were seized by royal treasuries. Loans became uncollectible. Letters of credit became worthless paper. International trade, dependent on Templar financial services, ground to a halt in many regions. The first international financial crisis had begun. But the Templars had anticipated danger. In the weeks before the arrests, large amounts of gold and silver disappeared from Templar treasuries. The Templar fleet vanished from its port in La Rochelle. Financial records were destroyed or hidden. To this day, the location of much of the Templar treasure remains unknown, spawning countless legends and treasure hunts. The dissolution of the Templars created a financial vacuum that took decades to fill. Italian banking houses like the Medici eventually stepped in, but they never achieved the Templars' combination of military might, religious authority, and financial sophistication. The idea of warrior bankers, of combining spiritual and financial power, died with the Templars. The last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in 1314, reportedly cursing Philip the Voul and Pope Clement V from the flames. Both died within a year, fueling legends about Templar revenge. But the real revenge was economic. Without Templar financial services, European trade suffered for generations. From the Templars' sophisticated financial instruments, we return to Rome, but a Rome in decline, where emperors discovered they could create money from nothing by the simple expedient of lying about what money was. The story of Roman currency debasement is a masterclass in economic self-destruction, showing how short-term financial tricks lead to long-term catastrophe. To understand Roman currency debasement, you need to understand what Roman money originally was. The denarius, Rome's standard silver coin for centuries, was initially about 95% pure silver, weighing about 4.5 grams. It was trustworthy currency because its value was intrinsic. The coin was worth the silver it contained. A denarius could buy a day's wages for a laborer, several days' food for a family, or a good tunic. The aureus, the gold coin, was even more stable, about 8 grams of nearly pure gold. These coins were so reliable that they were accepted from Britain to Persia. Roman coins have been found in India, China, and Scandinavia testament to their role as the ancient world's reserve currency. For centuries, sound as a Roman denarius was the equivalent of solid as the dollar today. But empire is expensive. Armies need pay, buildings need construction, games need funding, and barbarians need bribing. By the 1st century CE, Rome's expenses were outpacing its income. The traditional solution, conquering new territories and looting them, was becoming harder as Rome hit the limits of practical expansion. The empire needed more money, but there was only so much silver and gold to mine. Enter currency debasement, the ancient equivalent of printing money. The process was simple. Take in old coins through taxation, melt them down, add base metals like copper or bronze, and mint new coins with the same face value but less precious metal. A denarius that was 95% silver could become 90% silver, with the extra 5% allowing the mint to produce more coins from the same amount of silver. Nero was one of the first to systematically debase currency, reducing the silver content of the denarius to 93.5% and the weight of the aureus by 11%. This seemed clever, more coins to spend without raising taxes or conquering new territories. The immediate effects were positive. Nero could fund his building projects and games. Most people didn't notice the slightly lighter, slightly less pure coins. But debasement is addictive. Once you start, it's nearly impossible to stop. Each emperor faced the same problem. They needed money, debasement provided it, and the consequences wouldn't appear until after their reign. It was the perfect political solution: immediate benefits, deferred costs. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, debased the denarius to 79% silver to fund his wars against Germanic tribes. Commodus reduced it to 73%. Septimius Severus dropped it to 50%. By the time of Gallienus in 260 CE, the denarius contained only 5% silver. It was essentially a copper coin with a silver wash. In 200 years, the denarius had lost 95% of its silver content. The government tried to hide the debasement through various tricks. Coins were given a thin silver coating to look pure. Official edicts declared that the new coins had the same value as old ones. Using old, purer coins for transactions was sometimes banned, forcing people to accept the debased currency. The mint marks that had once guaranteed quality became meaningless stamps on increasingly worthless metal. But you can't fool economics forever. As the silver content dropped, prices rose. A modius of wheat that cost 3 denarii in 200 CE cost 300 denarii by 300 CE, 100-fold inflation in a century. Soldiers who had been happy with 225 denarii annually under Augustus demanded 750 under Domitian and 1,800 under Septimius Severus, not because they were greedier, but because the money was worth less. The psychological effects were profound. Romans had trusted their currency for centuries. Now they hoarded old coins, knowing they contained more silver. They demanded payment in gold instead of silver. They resorted to barter rather than accept increasingly worthless coins. Trust in imperial authority eroded along with trust in imperial currency. Foreign trade collapsed as external partners refused debased coins. Indian merchants, who had happily accepted denarii for centuries, now demanded gold or goods. The Silk Road trade that had brought Asian luxuries to Rome slowed to a trickle. Germanic tribes on the borders demanded payment in old, pure coins or refused treaties entirely. Debasement created a vicious cycle that accelerated Rome's decline. As coins lost value, the government needed more of them to buy the same goods and services. This meant more debasement, which meant more inflation, which meant more debasement. Each emperor inherited a worse situation and made it even worse for his successor. The military, Rome's largest expense, became impossible to maintain. Soldiers were paid in increasingly worthless coins, but needed to buy food and equipment at inflated prices. Mutinies became common. Armies proclaimed their generals emperor based on promises of bonuses and pay raises. The crisis of the 3rd century saw 50 emperors in 50 years, most killed by their own troops over pay disputes. Tax collection became nightmarish. The government demanded payment in gold while paying expenses in debased silver. Tax farmers who bid for the right to collect taxes went bankrupt when they couldn't extract enough value from the population. The government responded by making tax collection hereditary and mandatory. If you couldn't collect enough, you paid the difference from your own pocket. Agriculture, Rome's economic foundation, collapsed. Farmers couldn't get fair prices for their crops in debased currency, but had to pay taxes in gold. Many abandoned their farms rather than work for worthless money. The government responded by tying farmers to their land, the beginning of medieval serfdom. Free farmers became slaves to maintain agricultural production. Urban economies disintegrated. Craftsmen couldn't afford raw materials with debased coins. Merchants couldn't calculate prices when currency values changed daily. The famous Roman markets emptied as people reverted to subsistence production and barter. The complex division of labor that had made Rome prosperous vanished. The government tried increasingly desperate measures. Diocletian's edict on maximum prices in 301 CE attempted to freeze prices throughout the empire. It listed maximum prices for over 1,000 items, from wheat to purple silk, with death penalties for violations. It failed spectacularly. Merchants simply refused to sell at official prices, creating black markets and shortages. Aurelian tried to restore the denarius to its former silver content, but lacked enough silver. His reforms triggered riots when people realized their debased coins would be worthless. The mint workers themselves revolted, leading to battles in Rome's streets. Diocletian introduced new gold and silver coins with guaranteed purity. But they immediately disappeared from circulation, hoarded or melted down. Gresham's law operated perfectly. Bad money drove out good. Why spend a pure gold solidus when you could spend debased denarii? The new good coins vanished while the old bad coins continued circulating. Constantine's introduction of the gold solidus was more successful, but came at enormous cost. He confiscated temple treasures and private wealth to accumulate enough gold. He abandoned silver currency entirely, creating a two-tier economy where the wealthy used gold and the poor used nearly worthless bronze. This monetary apartheid accelerated social stratification. The solidus remained stable for centuries, but only because the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire learned from Rome's mistakes. They maintained strict currency standards, severely punished counterfeiters, and never succumbed to debasement temptation. The solidus became medieval Europe's preferred currency, trusted from London to Baghdad. But the Western Roman Empire never recovered from the debasement spiral. By 476 CE, when the last Western emperor was deposed, Roman currency was so worthless that the barbarian conquerors didn't even bother minting it. They preferred their own crude coins or simple barter to the sophisticated but worthless Roman monetary system. The lessons never learned. The Roman debasement story contains lessons that humanity repeatedly ignores. Every government that controls currency faces the same temptation: create more money to solve immediate problems. The short-term benefits are irresistible, the long-term costs seem manageable, and the consequences hit after current leaders are gone. The Chinese Song dynasty invented paper money and promptly inflated it into worthlessness. The French revolutionary government created assignats backed by confiscated church lands, then printed so many that they became worthless within years. The German Weimar Republic's hyperinflation of 1921 to 1923 showed that modern governments could destroy currency even faster than Rome. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January 1923 cost 200 billion marks by November. People carried money in wheelbarrows and burned it for warmth because it was cheaper than buying wood. Even today, governments worldwide engage in monetary policies that echo Roman debasement. Quantitative easing, negative interest rates, and massive deficit spending are modern versions of adding copper to silver coins. The technology is different, but the fundamental dynamic remains: governments creating money from nothing to fund current expenses. Part 4. The psychology of money. The history of salt currency, Templar banking, and Roman debasement reveals a fundamental truth. Money is ultimately psychological. Its value exists only in human minds, maintained by collective belief and trust. When that trust erodes, no amount of government force can maintain currency value. The Romans discovered this when people refused their debased coins despite legal tender laws. The Templars understood it when they built elaborate systems to maintain depositor confidence. Salt worked as currency because everyone agreed it had value beyond its monetary use. Every monetary system succeeds or fails based on psychological factors more than economic ones. Consider how irrational money makes humans. We'll work jobs we hate for pieces of paper or electronic digits. We'll kill for gold that has little practical use. We measure human worth in monetary terms. We have emotional relationships with money: fear, greed, pride, shame, that affect our decisions more than rational calculation. Roman coins bore emperors' faces, making money literally about faith in leadership. Medieval coins carried religious symbols, intertwining monetary and spiritual authority. Modern money features national symbols, founding fathers, and mottos about trusting God, revealing the quasi-religious nature of monetary faith. The rituals around money are essentially religious. Banks are built like temples, massive, imposing, permanent-looking structures designed to inspire confidence. The ceremony of signing loans, the solemnity of vaults, the priestly behavior of bankers, all echo religious practices. We've replaced faith in divine providence with faith in financial institutions, the technology of trust. Throughout history, monetary systems have developed increasingly sophisticated technologies to maintain trust. The Templars' encrypted letters of credit, Rome's detailed mint marks, and salt's physical properties all serve to prevent counterfeiting and maintain confidence. Modern money continues this evolution with watermarks, security threads, and blockchain technology. But technology alone never suffices. The most sophisticated anti-counterfeiting measures can't save a currency people don't trust. The Roman denarius had detailed imagery and edge inscriptions to prevent clipping, but these meant nothing when the silver content vanished. Modern Venezuelan bolivars have advanced security features but are still worthless due to hyperinflation. The real technology of money is social. The institutions, laws, and customs that maintain monetary value. Central banks, commercial banking regulations, international monetary agreements, and financial markets are all technologies for maintaining the collective fiction that money has value. They're more important than the physical or digital form money takes. The evolution from salt to coins to paper to digital money shows decreasing physical reality, but increasing systemic complexity. Salt was valuable itself. Coins contained valuable metal. Paper money represented gold or silver. Modern fiat currency represents nothing but government promise. Cryptocurrency represents mathematical proof of work. Each step requires more faith and more complex systems to maintain that faith. Each monetary innovation solved previous problems but created new ones. Coins solved salt's quality control issues but enabled debasement. Paper money solved coins' transport problems but enabled hyperinflation. Digital money solves paper's physical limitations but creates cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Cryptocurrency solves trust issues but creates environmental and scalability problems. The persistence of primitive money. Despite technological advancement, primitive forms of money persist because they solve problems modern money creates. In prisons, cigarettes become currency because official money is restricted. In collapsed economies, people revert to barter or commodity money. During wars, food and ammunition become more valuable than any currency. The 2008 financial crisis saw brief returns to primitive money. Greek communities created local currencies when euros became scarce. Detroit residents traded services through time banks. Argentine provinces issued their own quasi-currencies. These weren't technological regressions, but adaptive responses to monetary system failures. Even in stable economies, alternative currencies proliferate. Airline miles, store points, and gaming currencies are all forms of private money. Bitcoin and thousands of other cryptocurrencies attempt to create money without government backing. Local currencies like Ithaca Hours or Berk shares maintain community wealth. Each represents dissatisfaction with official money and attempts to create something better. The persistence of gold as a store of value, despite having no official monetary role, shows the enduring appeal of physical money. Central banks still hold gold reserves. Investors buy gold during uncertainty. Indian families accumulate gold jewelry as portable wealth. The psychological security of holding something tangible remains powerful despite rational arguments against gold's value. The social construction of value. Money's history shows that value is socially constructed rather than inherent. Salt had intrinsic value as a preservative, but its monetary value exceeded its practical value. Gold has limited practical use, but its monetary value far exceeds its industrial value. Paper money has no. The value exists in social agreement, not physical properties. This social construction makes money vulnerable to social change. The Templars' banking system collapsed when social support disappeared. Roman currency failed when citizens lost faith in empire. Salt stopped being money. When preservation technologies changed, every monetary system is one social shift away from worthlessness. But this vulnerability is also flexibility. Money can adapt to social needs in ways physical goods cannot. The Templars created international banking to serve pilgrims. Rome debased currency to fund military needs. Modern governments create money to stimulate economies. The social nature of money allows it to evolve with society. The distribution of money reflects and reinforces social hierarchies. Who gets to create money? Who has access to credit? Who accumulates wealth? These aren't economic inevitabilities, but social choices. The Templars lending to nobles, Rome's debasement benefiting the state, modern central banks' policies favoring certain sectors all show money as a tool of social power. Money also shapes social relations in return. Market economies create different social structures than gift economies. Credit relationships differ from cash transactions. Digital payments enable different interactions than physical currency. The form money takes influences the society that uses it. Part 5. The Hidden History of Monetary Disasters. Beyond the well-known stories of Roman debasement and Templar banking lie countless monetary disasters that shaped history in ways we rarely recognize. These failures, from ancient Chinese paper money to colonial American experiments, reveal patterns that repeat with depressing regularity. The Chinese invented paper money in the 7th century CE, 1,000 years before Europe. The Tang dynasty's flying money started as deposit receipts for merchants who didn't want to carry copper coins on dangerous roads. Sound familiar? Like the Templars' letters of credit, these receipts became currency themselves. Merchants realized they could trade the receipts instead of redeeming them for coins. They printed notes backed by silver and gold, theoretically redeemable at government offices. For a while, it worked brilliantly. Paper money facilitated trade, reduced transport costs, and allowed flexible monetary policy. China's economy boomed. But then came the Mongol invasions. The government needed money for defense, and printing it was easier than raising taxes. They printed more notes without increasing metal reserves. Merchants noticed that redemption became harder, then impossible. Inflation exploded. By 1260, paper money had lost 98% of its value. The Yuan dynasty that followed continued printing until their paper money was literally worthless, used for toilet paper and kindling. The Chinese experience created such trauma that when the Ming dynasty took power in 1368, they abandoned paper money entirely. China, which had invented paper currency, wouldn't use it again for 500 years. They had learned what Rome learned with debasement: monetary tricks have consequences. In medieval Europe, countless small-scale monetary disasters occurred that history barely records. The Flemish cities repeatedly debased their coinage to fund wars, destroying their trading economies. Italian city-states issued so many competing currencies that merchants needed specialists just to calculate exchange rates. The Polish kingdom inflated their currency so badly that merchants refused Polish coins entirely, paralyzing trade. The French monarchy's monetary manipulations were legendary. Philip IV, who destroyed the Templars partly for their wealth, also debased French currency by 66% in 2 years. He expelled Jewish moneylenders, seized their assets, then invited them back when the economy collapsed without credit. His monetary chaos contributed to famines and revolts that weakened France for generations. The colonial money experiments. The American colonies lacking gold and silver became laboratories for monetary experimentation. Each colony tried different solutions to the money shortage, creating a natural experiment in currency systems. The results ranged from brilliant innovation to spectacular failure. They needed to pay soldiers returning from a failed expedition to Quebec but had no gold or silver. So they printed paper notes, promising to accept them for tax payments. It worked so well that other colonies copied the model. Pennsylvania, under Benjamin Franklin's influence, created perhaps the most successful colonial currency. They issued paper money backed not by gold, but by land mortgages. Farmers could borrow paper money against their land, spend it into circulation, and repay with interest. The interest funded government operations without taxes. For 40 years, Pennsylvania prospered with this system, but other colonies were less disciplined. Rhode Island printed so much money that it became worthless. North Carolina's bills traded at 10% of face value. Virginia's tobacco notes, paper money backed by tobacco in warehouses, fluctuated wildly with crop yields. The chaos of colonial currencies was one reason for the Constitutional Convention's ban on state-issued money. The American Revolution triggered the new nation's first hyperinflation. The Continental Congress, lacking taxing power, printed continental dollars to fund the war. They printed $241 million face value by war's end. The phrase, "not worth a continental," entered the language as continental dollars traded at 1,000 to -1 against gold. George Washington complained his soldiers were papering their huts with worthless money. This disaster shaped American monetary thought for generations. The Constitution gave only the federal government power to coin money. The founders were so traumatized by paper money that many argued only gold and silver should be legal tender. Alexander Hamilton's creation of the first Bank of the United States was partly to prevent future hyperinflations, the Great Money Panics. The 19th century saw repeated monetary panics that revealed the fragility of even sophisticated financial systems. The Panic of 1837 started when President Jackson refused to recharter the national bank, creating monetary chaos. State banks issued their own notes, many backed by nothing. When cotton prices collapsed, banks failed in cascades, destroying 40% of America's banks. The collapse triggered bank runs across America and Europe. The resulting depression lasted 6 years in America, longer in Europe. Monetary contraction was so severe that deflation reached 30%. Prices fell by nearly a third. These panics weren't just American phenomena. The Latin American debt crisis of 1825 saw newly independent nations default on bonds, destroying British banks that had lent to them. The Australian banking crisis of 1893 saw 11 of 13 major banks close their doors. Argentina experienced currency crises roughly every decade from independence through the 20th century. Each panic followed similar patterns: excessive credit creation during good times, a triggering event that created doubt, bank runs as depositors rushed to convert deposits to cash, credit contraction as surviving banks hoarded reserves, economic depression as money disappeared from circulation, then, eventually, recovery and repetition of the cycle. The responses to panics shaped modern central banking. The Bank of England developed the concept of lender of last resort after the 1866 Overend-Gurney crisis. The U.S. Federal Reserve was created after the 1907 panic when J.P. Morgan had to personally organize a rescue. Each crisis led to new regulations that would prevent the last crisis but not the next one. The secret history of inflation. While hyperinflations like Weimar Germany get attention, the slow inflations that destroyed savings over generations are less visible but more impactful. The British pound, one of history's most stable currencies, lost 99.5% of its value between 1750 and 2020. A pound that could buy a cow in 1750. This slow destruction of monetary value represents history's greatest transfer of wealth, from savers to debtors, from workers to asset owners, from the prudent to the leveraged. It happened so slowly that each generation barely noticed, like the proverbial frog in slowly heating water. The Spanish price revolution of the 16th century showed how imported inflation could destroy economies. Spanish gold and silver from the Americas flooded Europe, increasing money supply by 600%. Prices rose 600% over a century. Spanish manufactured goods became uncompetitive. The discovery of gold in California, 1848, and Australia, 1851, triggered worldwide inflation. Global gold stock doubled in 20 years. Prices rose 50% worldwide. Debtors celebrated as their loans became easier to repay. Creditors were ruined as their loans were repaid in depreciated money. Social structures based on fixed incomes collapsed. But the most insidious inflations were those engineered by governments for political purposes. The Roman emperors debased currency to fund wars and games. Medieval kings manipulated money to escape debts, Modern governments inflate to reduce debt burdens and fund spending without explicit taxation, the alternative money systems. Throughout history, communities have created alternative monetary systems when official money failed or didn't serve their needs. These experiments, mostly forgotten, pioneered concepts that mainstream economics only recently recognized. The Islamic world developed banking without interest, forbidden by religious law. Instead of lending money for interest, Islamic banks bought goods and resold them at markup, or entered profit-sharing partnerships. These methods, seemingly inefficient, actually created more stable banking systems with fewer panics than Western interest-based banking. Medieval monasteries operated gift economies internally, while participating in market economies externally. Monks contributed labor according to ability and received goods according to need. This communist system, within capitalist surroundings, lasted centuries, suggesting alternative economic organization is possible, even within dominant systems. The Inca Empire operated entirely without money, using instead a complex system of labor obligations and centralized redistribution. Citizens owed labor to the state mit'a, which organized public works and military service. Goods were collected and redistributed based on need. This moneyless economy supported 12 million people and built architectural marvels that survive today. Temples issued their own coins, accepted for donations and payment within temple lands. These private currencies were often more stable than government money, backed by the temple's land holdings and religious authority. The Wurgel experiment in 1930s Austria demonstrated alternative money's potential. The town, facing depression unemployment, issued stamp scrip that lost value monthly unless stamps were purchased and affixed. This created incentive to spend quickly, increasing monetary velocity. Unemployment fell 25% in 1 year. The central bank, threatened by the success, banned the experiment. Conclusion: the future history of money. As we conclude this journey through money's strange history, from Roman soldiers' salt wages through Templar banking networks to imperial debasement schemes, we see patterns that suggest where money might go next. Every form of money we've examined solved previous problems while creating new ones. Salt solved the coincidence of wants problem but was bulky and could spoil. Coins solved portability but enabled debasement. Paper solved weight but enabled hyperinflation. Digital money solves physical constraints but creates cyber vulnerabilities. Each generation thinks it has perfected money, only for the next to reveal the flaws. The current monetary system, fiat currencies backed by government promise, fractional reserve banking creating money from debt, central banks manipulating supply, would seem insane to our ancestors. We've completely severed money from physical reality. A Roman centurion receiving salt could eat it. A Templar knight could verify silver's purity. Modern money exists only as magnetic patterns on computer drives, as abstract as angels dancing on pins. Yet this abstraction enables miracles our ancestors couldn't imagine. Billions of transactions occur daily across the globe. Capital flows instantly to where it's needed. Complex derivatives hedge risks that once destroyed kingdoms. The same abstraction that enables manipulation also enables innovation. Cryptocurrencies represent another leap into abstraction, money backed not by governments or gold, but by mathematics and consensus. Bitcoin's blockchain is essentially a Templar ledger. Smart contracts are letters of credit that execute themselves. Decentralized finance recreates banking without banks. But history suggests caution about monetary revolution. Every generation thinks it solved money's problems. The Romans thought debasement was clever until their economy collapsed. The Chinese thought paper money was brilliant until hyperinflation destroyed it. The Templars thought their network was invincible until politics destroyed it. The patterns we've seen repeat with depressing regularity. Governments will always be tempted to manipulate money for short-term gain, always seek alternative currencies when official money. Technology changes money's form, but not its fundamental nature. Trust, once lost, takes generations to rebuild. Every monetary system contains the seeds of its own destruction. The salt roads of Rome are now highways carrying trucks full of goods bought with electronic transfers. The Templar commanderies are now bank branches processing blockchain transactions. The debased denarii are now quantitatively eased dollars. The forms change, but the underlying human dynamics remain constant. What would a Roman merchant think of tap to pay? What would a Templar banker make of credit default swaps? What would a Habsburg emperor think of negative interest rates? They'd probably recognize the underlying patterns. Humans trying to store value, transfer wealth, and inevitably game the system. The future history of money will likely recapitulate the past in new forms. Governments will find new ways to debase currency, perhaps through digital inflation or algorithmic manipulation. People will create new alternative currencies, perhaps backed by energy, time, or attention. Technology will enable new forms of money, perhaps quantum money or neural currencies. But the fundamental challenges will remain: how to create stable stores of value, efficient mediums of exchange, and fair units of account. The most profound lesson from money's history is that money is ultimately about trust between humans. Salt worked because people trusted its value. The Templars succeeded because people. Roman currency failed when trust in empire evaporated. Every monetary system is a crystallized form of social trust. As we move toward an increasingly digital and abstract monetary future, this lesson becomes more relevant, not less. Algorithms can't create trust, only verify it. Blockchains can't enforce honesty, only record it. Artificial intelligence can't generate confidence, only analyze it. The human element remains central. The strange history of money isn't really about money. It's about humans trying to cooperate, trade, and build civilization, despite our tendencies toward greed, fraud, and short-sightedness. Money is the tool we created to enable cooperation among strangers, and like any tool, it can be used well or poorly. Tonight's exploration has taken us from the salt mines of ancient Rome to the digital networks of modern finance, from warrior monks inventing international banking to emperors discovering inflation's temptations. We've seen money as commodity, coin, paper, and pixels. We've witnessed its creation and destruction, its use and abuse, its evolution and revolution. But perhaps the strangest thing about money's history is that we're still writing it. Every transaction you make, every currency you trust or distrust, every financial innovation you adopt or reject, you're participating in money's ongoing evolution. The patterns we've explored tonight, the rise and fall of currencies, the search for stable value, the tension between innovation and tradition, continue playing out in real time. The Roman soldier receiving his salt salary, the pilgrim depositing gold with the Templars, the merchant accepting debased denarii, they all thought their monetary system was permanent, natural, inevitable. We think the same about ours. History suggests we're all wrong. Money will continue evolving in ways we can't imagine, solving problems we don't yet have, creating crises we can't foresee. But the human element will remain constant. Our need to trade, our desire for security, our temptation to manipulate, our capacity for both trust and betrayal. So the next time you make a purchase, transfer funds, or check your balance, remember you're participating in one of humanity's strangest and most powerful inventions. You're using a technology that's simultaneously ancient and modern, physical and abstract, individual and. You're part of money's strange history, adding your own chapter to a story that began with salt and hasn't ended yet. The white crystals that Roman soldiers valued, the encrypted documents Templar Knights protected, the debased coins Roman emperors distributed, they're all ancestors of the numbers on your screen, the cards in your wallet, the currencies in your accounts. Money's forms change, but its essence remains: human trust made tangible, cooperation made possible, value made transferable. And that, perhaps, is the strangest thing of all about money, that something so powerful exists only because we all agree to pretend it does. The collective fiction of value that started with salt and continues with cryptocurrencies represents humanity's greatest act of imagination. We've created something from nothing and made it the foundation of civilization. The story continues. The patterns repeat. The cycles turn. What seems permanent will prove temporary. What seems revolutionary will become conventional. What seems impossible will become inevitable. Money's strange history isn't finished. We're living it, creating it every single day.